Good morning. On behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank, we welcome you to Supply Chains and Social Impact in the COVID-19 Era, a conversation between IDB President Luis Alberto Moreno and the Chairman and CEO of Danone, Emmanuel Faber. The conversation will be in English with interpretation into Spanish. Para escuchar el evento en español, haga clic en el icono del mundo que encontrará en la parte baja de su pantalla y seleccione el idioma. Please send your questions to policy@iadb.org. President Moreno, please go ahead.
Well, good morning and good afternoon to Emmanuel Faber. I'm the Chairman and CEO of Danone. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. You know, Danone, as it's commonly known in the United States, or Danone as we call it in Latin America, is one of the world's oldest and largest food and beverage companies. Its products are available in more than 120 countries on 5 continents, including those, of course, of both North and South America. It employs over 100,000 people and relies on many, many small producers across our region, just as they rely on Danone for their livelihoods. Now, what makes Danone truly special, however, is the very reason that the IDB has partnered with Danone. Its leadership and in both social and environmental responsibility. And that's something that we're very proud of our partnership. And in fact, in collaborating with Danone, through our IDB Lab, which is our innovation incubator, we're improving thousands of lives through ethical, sustainable projects across the region. For instance, we have done work in door-to-door saleswomen across Brazil, or informal recyclers in Argentina, or small dairy farmers in Mexico. But today, like in all corners of the globe, Danone is faced with all the challenges that come with the coronavirus pandemic. How, for instance, are they keeping their supply chains operating in this very difficult time? And how will, under this new normal, will a company like Danone emerge? And the answer, of course, not only affects the company's bottom line, but the availability, and this is a big discussion today around the world, of basic foods to countless households, as well as the livelihoods of so many small producers and workers. How is Danone, for instance, doing with its social and environmental responsibility mission, and how has it been affected by the crisis, both now and in the long term? And how are you supporting the many individuals and communities across Latin America and the Caribbean that are key to supply chains and particularly vulnerable to the pandemic? It is this and other issues that I would love to talk today with Emmanuel. And perhaps I would just turn it over to you and you give us a context of how you are dealing with the many challenges, and then we'll start a broader conversation where we'll be taking questions from the audience. Over to you, Emmanuel, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you very much for your kind words. And I'm very honored by the invitation. And of course, I could not refuse, given how important IDB is for us as a partner in, as you pointed to, in what we're trying to achieve with creating inclusive ecosystems around the food value chains, working with small business entrepreneurs, farmers, scavengers across the cycle of food, and a number of very important initiatives that we've got together in Latin America in particular. Well, for a company like us, our mission is really bring health through food to as many people as possible. And it's been a mission for 15 years now that we've chosen, carefully going for the right portfolio of products and trying to make sure that we do our business right to create value for all along the cycle of production. But we have one framework of action that we call One Planet, One Health. And this framework of action is basically the idea that the planet health and the planet and the health of people are connected together. And this crisis for us is an obvious case for this framework of action, basically. And we feel it even more relevant than it has ever been. The way we started to answer this crisis was to ensure that the food supply will continue. Anywhere we operate in 60, 80 countries, making sure that we continue to be able to serve, because it was very clear from pantry loading, panic buying, that immediately after health, the topic of food was there for people. And it was then even a matter of political stability in a number of countries. So we were sometimes urged by governments, and sometimes we, because the pandemic advanced and we had experience from one geography to another, we were urging governments in other places to take advanced measures in order to ensure that the food supply would continue. Immediately with that came also the question of the safety of our people, because without the people, and the reason that the food supply could be a problem was the absenteeism of people, the quarantines, and people being ill, etc. So we put in place very strong safety measures for people, and we added an important aspect for us, which was we guaranteed all the jobs and all the salaries for the 100,000 people at Danone for the whole of Q2, between March and June, and 30th of June, so that people would feel safe in their working environment, not only their health, but really about their job. And even if we extended a health coverage for COVID to their family, so that they can deal with their family, their kids, their parents. And the fact is that because of that, the absenteeism went back very quickly, went down. We could, factories have been able to serve constantly, which allowed us also to protect the farmers. Because one of the problems was that there were some radical shifts. Some channels were completely closed, and therefore prices were going down very much for farmers. Some other channels were exploding, and then even the farmers could not supply. And for instance, some of the in Europe, some of the migrant workers, seasonal workers for agriculture, were not allowed to move through the borders, and so local agriculture was not able to even have the manpower that they needed to just harvest the fruits or the vegetables, etc. So all of this has been frankly a big mess all over the place. At the end of the day, it worked. I think overall, this crisis shows that the level of cooperation within the industry, across, alongside the value chains, with governments, has allowed, in most cases, in nearly all cases in the countries where we operate, to overcome that phase of the crisis. But in the same time, I think there were big lessons to be learned in terms of how much can we afford to be just in time versus just in case. The lack of inventory, of stocks, of resilience, because two suppliers instead of just one, etc., has taught all of us many lessons that shouldn't be forgotten. And I think it's even a bigger question, which this crisis is putting to us, which is, are our food systems, the way they work today, really resilient for the future?
And that's a fascinating question, which is, as you describe it, just in time or just in case. When you look towards the next 5 years, how do you think sourcing will change? Will we have less imports? Will some have called it the natural economy, which you would have far more production closer to home? And how is that going to mean that certainly the questions of pricing and competitive pressures, which you are always under, how do you see that evolving?
Well, I think that first of all, we need to acknowledge that this caught us all totally by surprise, and that there are really going to be 3 phases in this crisis. And I don't even, the last one not even being the post-COVID. So we're all speaking like post-COVID now, but for me, it's with COVID. It's a COVID world. We are very far from being, and I think it would even be dangerous to think that we can live in a COVID-free world. If that's not this COVID, it may be another COVID. And so there was the very early stage of the crisis, which was, the last 3-4 months, big lockdowns all over the place, huge economic downturn. There is now a second phase of gradual, very fragile and very granular de-lockdown. Obviously, strategies change completely from one country to another, in the US from one state to another, even from one city to another in all the countries. We can see that now in China, back again, etc. So I think it will last for, I don't know, if I had to guess, I'd say the end of the year. So it will take literally several months, a couple of quarters to gradually reopen. And then there will be a recovery phase, a long recovery phase. Our assumption has been for already several months that the GDP of most of our large countries will go down by probably double digit this year. And that next year is certainly not going to be as high as 2019, maybe not even 2022. So we are seeing a world where the recovery will be long. GDP growth will therefore be hindered for at least 2 to 3 years. With that, if we assume this, it means that there will be 2 tensions, I guess, in the food aspect. One is the fact that people will pay more attention to the health, their health, and the link between food and health. We can see that already today. We have a lot of probiotics and fermented dairy and fermented vegetal proteins, and they are just flying. It's, because really people understand the immune systems, the guts, metabolism, and so probiotics and bacteria are good for you, etc. Hydration, interestingly as well, some people are turning, to high quality brands, safe brands for water, the same way. And on the other side, there will be a very strong economic crisis, which will call for affordable solutions. So I think it will create a sort of polarization of the demand. But yet I think there will be some fundamental aspects that will be there. You will see more local than before, for good and or bad reasons, but there are huge tailwinds towards localization of food systems. I personally believe that they are needed. I mean, you and I have been discussing, and we have those partnerships together that are really about the local agriculture and the local food systems. I think we need to be, the food system overall will be much more resilient if it was more local today, localized. So that will be there. And at the end of the day, my feeling is that people will ultimately pay more as part of if there is a big downturn, the percentage of revenues that will be going through food will be higher. That there is no other choice than this. So, fundamentally today, I don't think we are paying on average in the world, and certainly in OECD countries, we're not paying the true cost of food. Because we do not repay for the lack of regenerative agriculture and the fact that the soil health is depleting all over the place, which means that farmers won't be able to farm anymore in 2 generations because of the way they farm today. We don't pay for the carbon that is extracted by agriculture instead of being sunk into agriculture. So Danone decided this year that we would release last year, the 2019 numbers, in February this year were released post-carbon. So our earning per share was shown, and then there was the version post-carbon, and it was half of it because of the cost of the whole carbon that goes through our agriculture. And we want to make sure that our shareholders understand that unless you pay for that carbon, you are actually serving dividends to your shareholders before you create a resilient business model. And this is where I'm saying, overall, we are not paying the true cost of food, including water that goes lost into irrigation, etc., etc. So I'm very long here, but I think that we will see the continuation of this kind of revolution in the food sector, where people want their food sovereignty back. They want to take that into control. And I think it means a lot in terms of the large companies like ours to adapt to that.
Emmanuel, one of the things I remember talking to you, I'm always been a huge admirer of the things you have done. And I remember that one time we were in a conference in China, and I was asking you about what you developed with Mohammed Yunus, with yogurt for low-income people, and you were able, essentially using the yogurt to include the kinds of nutrition elements that were needed for poor communities. And typically, as most countries in the emerging world, the education system also serves as a way to provide at least a set of meals to children, such that they can improve their nutrition and therefore their learning capability. And you were also mentioning something that is very real, which is the contraction of our economies. We see today in Latin America, I mean, we gained tremendously over the last 20 years, as you know well, in numbers of people moving out of poverty, middle classes. We are risking losing a lot of those years as a result. How do you prepare yourself to deal in those poor communities where, as you correctly say, generally is going to, the amount of money that we spend per capita on food is going to increase, but how to balance that in a world that we need so much more social cohesion? This is a moment, of course, where the world has seen with very clearly all our differences, and these are the gaps that we must close.
Yes, thank you for the question, Luis. And the first thing that we did already back in March was to ensure that we would support the ecosystem of Danone, the job ecosystem of Danone, around the company itself. So let me say that 10 years ago, after the Lehman Brothers and the whole crisis in 2008, we created a fund called Danone Ecosystem Fund that was actually approved by our shareholders, where we put 100 million euro, and which is one of the anchor for our partnership when we are doing projects with you guys in like the Margarita project in Mexico on agriculture with several hundreds of small milk farmers, for instance, and or the cartoneros in Argentina with several thousands of waste pickers, project like Quiteras in Brazil, etc. This fund has been the way for us to click with your organization to provide support to NGOs that work on the capabilities development and the resilience of the jobs of very small micro actors, economic actors that are around the big organized Danone company. So in each of the countries where we operate, we measured our job footprint, and we happen to understand that for any job at Danone, there are anywhere between 5 and 10 more jobs that are around the company, directly around the company, which means, if you multiply by the number of people by family, it's a lot of people. So that fund has existed for 10 years and has allowed to secure and to create resilience for dozens of thousands of jobs around our ecosystem. Two things I mentioned here. One is, with the COVID crisis, it was very clear for us that these jobs would be made vulnerable again. And so what we did was that this time we opened a financing facility. So we opened a 300 million euros facility for all the 15,000 most vulnerable actors around the Danone ecosystem to be able to go through the crisis. And so we are paying our suppliers in an accelerated manner, and we are letting cash facilities from the small distributors, the street vendors, etc., in Latin America, in Indonesia, Southeast Asia, in Africa, in order for them to meet ends, basically. We obviously see this as a very, very important aspect. We also, what we did is to reinforce the multi-annual contracts that we have, so that people feel that they can invest and they have a partner for longer periods of time than just the next few months. So that's what we started doing, and I think that this facility will gradually be more and more used by our suppliers along the supply chain in order to make sure that they can survive. The other thing is, we created last year, as part of the G7 cycle, I was asked by President Macron, because France was chairing hosting the G7 in Biarritz last year, to create an initiative that we call Business for Inclusive Growth, which with this vision that we needed to have a growth model which is more inclusive, exactly what you rightly said, and I'm so inspired by what you're pursuing on your own and your speeches about this, Luis, which is there's absolutely a need for more social justice here. There will not be climate justice without social justice. We need to do both at the same time, and therefore we at the G7 we gathered about 40 super large companies in the world, multinational, among the largest banks in the world, some of the largest philanthropies as well. We'd love to have a conversation with IDB about it, because there is a commitment to develop inclusive business models. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because, in particular, one of them is about the inclusion in supply chains, and how are we making sure that that's not only about the prices, but it's also about forced labor, decent wages, the ability for farmers in particular to have working conditions overall, and contracts with companies like ours that makes sense for them. And I think it's absolutely essential in the crisis that is coming. And sorry, I'm very long here, so I will stop, but I think we need to be collective more than we were, to be really supportive of each other in our ability to respond. And we need to be open and innovative in the way we go there. And I would really say that multilateral financing it has a key role to play next to private sector and public, and a key role to play in particular including with things like output-based financing on these development support programs in such a big crisis than the one that's coming.
Oh, this is great. That takes me to the next question. You are the first French company to become a benefit corporation, or an enterprise, a mission as it's called, which basically fits in with all this discussion of stakeholder capitalism, and you lead on this very early on. And I would love for you to just kind of walk us through, how is your company going to be different from other companies that are in the French stock exchange. And how did you go through all of this process, which is a very complex process, not only the regulation that you basically push to have, but now the example that you're providing for other companies to follow you on the same concept of a benefit corporation?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, last Friday was a big moment because, after 100 years of history, Danone became an entreprise à mission, as you said, which is the equivalent of a public benefit corporation. And this is after a couple of years of hard work to make the thing happen, both at Danone, but also with the French government in adopting the law, etc. So yeah, it was a pretty big, pretty important moment for all of us at Danone. What amazed me most, Luis, here is the support of our shareholders, because, we had a few conversations with some of our largest shareholders about it, and sometimes for a long time, because it's part of a more longer term process of Danone wanting to reach the BCorp certification. So BCorp is a non-profit independent certifying body that reviews, audits a list of practices around ESG metrics. And you need to have a certain number minimum to be certified, and then the thing becomes more and more difficult as you go in time. So we have about 30% of our total business today already certified BCorp, but we want by 2030, it's one of our goals to be certified as a total company. And at the entry point of the crisis, we decided that we are going to move this forward to 25. So becoming a French entreprise à mission was a big part of adjusting the governance to be able to become now, when we will be ready, a BCorp certified company as a whole. So that is the significance of it for us. What it changes is basically it says that the mission of the company is embedded in the bylaws, in its constitution. So in the constitution, we have objectives about local health, impacting health of people through our diets and products offerings, preserving the planet's resources and their replenishment in our ecosystems, the ones we use. So carbon, milk, water, etc. We have the development of our teams and building the future with them. And we have the inclusiveness of our growth. So inclusiveness is now part of the bylaws of the company. It really makes a difference because it means that with 99% of our shareholders voting on that, it really gives a mandate to the board to say, guys, this is what we want you to do. It's, yes, we understand that it's going to be good for profit at the end of the day, and we'll reap the dividends of that, of course, but that is in the bylaws. And this is true enough so that in the French law, there is now a mission committee that has been appointed of 10 people that are independent from the company, including experts from the WHO and from the UN, having worked on SDGs and etc., that will be reporting every year on our progress on the KPIs of these 4 objectives that I've just mentioned. So it's a pretty demanding thing in terms of transparency and being accountable for it. So it means that now, if you think about everything that I just said before, we were doing that because that was the culture of the company. But now, not only it's the culture, it's a law, it's the regulation given by the shareholders to the company. So the mindset is going to be very different. And to your question, I've already received a couple of text messages since Friday about, from some of my colleagues, CEOs here in France, who want to discuss because they're considering, moves in the same direction. So I hope that this literally, unanimous support by shareholders will create a precedent that it's worth a try. You can't say you don't get it if you don't ask it.
This is a great point. And in fact, some of our economic research shows something which you already know, which is that those companies that have very high ESG standards are performing better than their counterparts, which are not with the same kind of standards. Now, let me turn over. I have a lot of questions coming in for you. So I'll start with the first one. Is Danone's goal of 100% recyclable packaging by 2025 the ideal goal, or should it be 100% biodegradable packaging, given that many countries don't have recycling facilities?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think indeed that packaging is a local, or packaging solutions will have to be local, because it all depends on what exists, what does not exist. So we are really working on coming from non-recyclable to recyclable, then coming from recyclable to effectively recycled, and then we are also working on biodegradable. I'm a big, believer in biodegradability. Luis, you were referring to the Grameen Danone work with Mohamed Yunus, the first ever PLA cup, so a biosourced material cup we used in the world was in 2006 in Bangladesh, because there was no indeed collection system, but they had biodigesters in the villages. So these collective biodigesters, you would put the cup into it, and after 3 weeks, with this right temperature and humidity there, it would become back to starch, what it was to start with. So indeed, yes, we're also working on that. I think we need both.
Another question is that you mentioned that you're not paying, or people are not paying for the true cost of food. What strategies do you think could work to persuade consumers to be willing to pay more for food? And are you aware of any successful examples?
Yes, there are successful examples, and they may not be branded, but when you think about the fact that on average, some people are ready to pay 30 to 50% premium on organic food. It means when they when they trust in the model, they are ready to pay more. And I'm not suggesting here that organic is the panacea and everything should go organic. That's not my point, but it shows that people are ready to. People are ready to pay a higher price when it is local now in many countries, not everywhere, but a different set of people that are ready to do that. When it comes to water, for instance, we have that with our Danone communities models, including the El Alberto in Mexico, for instance, and others, that people are ready to pay for water. When in Bangladesh, in India, instead of going to the well or to the pond, they're ready to pay a small price because they know that water has gone through reverse osmosis. It's sold. We don't get dividends on that. It's purely a social business. And we already serve like 6 million people in the world on this. It's the largest water access thing. And they're ready to pay because they know they're not going to get ill. So I think what is needed here is to reconnect people with the true nature of their food. And the problem is that brands tend to disconnect them. They offer this idea or this notional view of a brand that brings you safe, healthy, whatever food, and they cut people from understanding where that is coming from, what has been the true cost of it, how many forced labor there is in it, how many deforestation there is in it, etc., etc. So no, I don't have a clear solution, but I have evidence that there are models that work. And I really believe that the current moment is a very important one because there's now a whole generation that has a different view about food. They don't want to trust the old model. And this is an opportunity that we should take to make sure that this conversation becomes a much bigger conversation.
Listening to you, Emmanuel, and for people who don't know you enough, you've been a huge, not only proponent, but advocate and very much front and center on issues of climate change. As I listen to you, is there a way, for instance, to start including issues like traceability, for instance, to be able to incorporate on mass marketers like you, to be able to not only the quality of food, but also the awareness of where it's produced, and that is, that sustainability throughout is being observed?
Yes, I think so. Yes, Luis. We already see that in most of the countries where we are. I was talking, for instance, about earlier in the conversation about the fact that there was a lot of tailwind behind localization. One of the tailwind is consumers wanting to know that the provenance-based food is among the highest segments of growth in the overall food system. So you want to understand the exact region, city in which the product is coming from. Even the country is not enough, but within the country, you want to understand where it's coming from. And if it is your country, it's even better. So this, by definition, is going to create a level of transparency and traceability for the consumers that is higher, because it's simpler if you are in the US to check on a US company or a US brand than if like a tomato, for instance, a tomato, ketchup, where the tomato is being grown in China, sent in Nigeria, being treated in Nigeria, then sent in for canning in Italy, and then it's got the label of Italy, and then it's sent to the US like it's a tomato from, tomato sauce from Italy. Well, no, that's not the truth. And so I think this scrutiny on localization is definitely going to drive because there will be consumer attention on this. There will be, civil society apps tracking that. There will be an increased awareness about these topics, and therefore I hope a higher level of overall higher quality food processing overall.
In speaking, we all know that this pandemic, and as you say, we're going to live with it for some time. It was something that happened, as a surprise to the whole world. But certainly, climate change is something that has been knocking on our door for some time. Do you see that there's been trade-offs? Certainly, you got looking not only at your company but overall. How can we bring this question of the challenges on climate change, especially in our region in Latin America, where the production of food, especially, is really the source of many of our carbon emissions, because we're largely a very clean kind of a hemisphere overall. But notwithstanding, it is in the production of food where you see most of the problems, and how to get that awareness, and how to the balance that has to happen, and how you see it playing out, for instance, even in your company today because of COVID.
Yes, it's a huge question. And so for us, if I look at it very simply, the direction hasn't changed. I think if I could express myself, I think we should be looking at this crisis. The GDP of our countries are going to go down, like maybe by 10 years. They will send that back, all of us in GDP per cap, 10, 15 years back. And from there, we should ask ourselves and look at this crisis as a sign, a warning that being sent from the future. What should we do in 2005, if we are in 2005, to avoid that it happens in 2020 and probably change the way we live for the next 10, 20, 50 years? I don't know. What should we do differently? And I'm pretty sure that one of the things we should be doing differently is farm and eat and travel differently. We know that intensive agricultural models are a factor of pandemics for many reasons. We know that monocropping is a factor of pandemics. It's a factor of lack of resilience of the food system. It's just in time versus just in case. And so these, we have a question now, which is, do we want to go back economically as soon as possible to the previous peak, which is a full of carbon peak? Or do we pause and ask ourselves about what is the other path? If we look at ourselves in some aspects, I took a plastic and recycled plastics. It's going to be very difficult in the next several months to find enough recycled plastics resin for the commitments that we have to use only recycled plastic in our bottles, because the recycling operations are not working at capacity. So we're missing volumes there. So probably this we will have to postpone by a few months, and that's life. We have to agree that for a few months we have to wait, but we don't change the direction or the willingness to go. Regenerative agriculture, I think we should accelerate, because to your point, of course, in Latin America is an incredibly powerful region in terms of food, and actually in food traditions and cultures, etc. But production, sheer agriculture. Yet it's also in many ways, certainly not generally, but there are areas where monocropping and cash crops and intensive agriculture is a challenge for the resilience of the model. The water scarcity will be there. Climate change is there to say we need to change. And the big thing about agriculture is that, as you all know probably on this call, is that it produces as much greenhouse gas emissions as the whole of industry. But nobody is really seriously talking about it. But the fact is that unlike industry cannot put the carbon back into the oil pit where it was before. But agriculture can and actually should sink back the carbon into the soil by adopting these regenerative agriculture practices. So I think it's a whole system where you need to change the overall land use, basically, the way the crops are being used by the local and the global food systems. And I would be prepared, I can tell you, I would be prepared, we at Danone, we are, and not only we are, but we do, we're prepared to pay a significantly higher price for a non-deforestation or a deforestation-free crop. We've installed in the US the first ever fully segregated palm oil and soy systems to ensure that our brands, International Delight and others, are using ingredients that we know trace not only to the mill, but to the field. And so there is demand there. But it's a whole local systems that, of course, as you know much, much better than me, that takes a lot of time, and you need to give a perspective. So you need a policy that is stable, which is super difficult all across the world now. And you need businesses to come in and say, and assist to say, if you produce this, there will be demand and at such price, so that farmers can invest. And this is back to my point about the collective. And that's one of the reasons we created this coalition of business for biodiversity at the UN last year, which is really working on this topic. Sorry, I'm so long, but it's a very important question.
No, this is precisely what I wanted to do. Another question here, and I know we're getting to the end, but it's interesting in terms of kind of the culture of Danone, and what elements of that culture and that behavior of the culture of Danone has helped you through the crisis. Because certainly, when you go to Danone and not only meet you and get very inspired, but it's everybody in your company is so committed to the value system that you've created, and now, of course, the so-called enterprise mission. So this, I imagine also helps you to attract a lot of talent because the sense of purpose that people have in a company like Danone. But what about your culture? Have you seen as one of the elements that has helped you thrive during this very difficult?
Yeah, thank you for the nice comments about the people at Danone, Luis, and that's certainly something that continues to, that I continue to find incredible as the CEO of this company, which is the level of energy and commitment and engagement of the teams all around the place. And frankly, I'm sure it's been the same for your organization, but we've seen incredible solidarity within the teams in this very difficult moment. What I think is probably the most, what has been the most at work, I would say, during this crisis for Danone has been this culture of being adaptive, I would say, agile and never believe that you are arrived somewhere. You're just progressing, and there's so much more to do. And looking at also, I guess, crisis like an opportunity, as would say our Chinese friends, has always been the case. And I was reflecting on this, a year ago for the centenary, the 100 years anniversary of the Danone brand with the shareholders. I think when you think about a company that's gone 100 years old, it's gone through so many crises in the 20th century. It's just incredible how much the collective has learned about to adapt, etc. And the same today. I mean, if you think at Argentina today, I mean, it's been we were there in 2001, with the crisis already, and we are back there. And Russia has been the same, and so. There is a collective that knows how to react in crisis moments and to say, well, how can we emerge even stronger after the crisis? And that collective culture is there, and it's been at work. And I think that's part of the reasons why it's very too early to say how good we will be doing through the crisis, but at least some big decisions were made quite early, and I hope that we will continue to be ahead of the crisis in the coming months as well.
Well, Emmanuel, this has been a fascinating discussion. I mean, clearly listening to you, it's not only fascinating, but equally inspirational, because you've, from the days you were managing things in Bangladesh, the things you did there, and kind of that culture that you've been able to instill in Danone, and certainly food products are going to be a huge issue in the years ahead. I think this is clearly one of the consequences of the pandemic. So there's a lot to talk about, and it will be a lot of your leadership where we're definitely going to be following and working closely with you. So thank you very, very much for your time. And again, congratulations for all that you're doing.
Thank you, Luis. And again, I'd like to thank you. I'm very honored to be able to have this opportunity, and pleased to speak again with you, actually. I'd like simply to say how much our partnership with IDB is critical for us and what we do. You're really partners in the most difficult thing that we need to crack as an industry. So we are proud to be your partners, and would like to continue to rely on your expertise, your energy. There's so much things that you know and that we don't know, including market intelligence, expertise, financing, your footprint in Latin America. So I really want to say a big thank you for your trust, and looking forward to continue to build a partnership.
Cool. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, or rest of the day.
Merci. Bye-bye.